just really fortunate to have Sheriff Richard Mack here at our conference. I have seen him speak on YouTube at many different conferences, and he's been very involved in the fight for land rights out west with the Lavoy Finicum situation and the Clive and Bundy situation out on the BLM land. But I can't begin to tell you how many of our members that I've spoken to out in the hinterlands at different events that don't realize that a sheriff is an elected post. It's a little scary. And part of what Sheriff Mack is an advocate for is not only constitutional rights, but the importance of having a constitutional sheriff. I know we take so much for granted, and you would just assume that all sheriffs are based on constitutional principles, but that is sadly not the case. And one of the things that I've been talking to Sheriff Mack about is the collaboration and partnership between the Humane Society of the United States and the National Sheriff's Association. You all have heard about that, right? The announcement that came out just a few months ago. They've made this a big promotion that HSUS has partnered with the National Sheriff's Association. Well, this is a huge concern for everybody, and especially to us because of what we do. And so it seemed like a perfect fit to have Sheriff Richard Mack come and speak about this, because they're the first line of defense. This is a very powerful, important post, your county sheriff. And I think it's important for everyone to understand the role of the sheriff. And it is with tremendous pleasure and honor to introduce Sheriff Richard Mack. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Because of the schedule, we're going to move really quickly here. Those of you who have seen my presentation before, you know I can hardly ever get finished. And today is going to be no exception to that norm. Just suffice it to say that I spent 20 years in law enforcement. The last 8 of those 20, I served as Graham County Sheriff in Southeast Arizona. In 1983, I was converted to the United States Constitution as a rookie cop at a seminar that was taught by Dr. W. Cleon Skousen. If any of you have heard that name before, he wrote The 5,000-Year Leap, The Making of America, and was known throughout the world as one of the most constitutional scholars ever in contemporary history. And at that seminar, I was convinced that we can, as police officers in this country, serve and protect the community as we promised to do, enforce the law, and obey, follow, and defend the United States Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights. We don't need to cut corners. We don't need to ignore our oath of office. We can still be cops and true guardians of the American Republic. So, with that in mind, I quit the police department in Utah, where I was serving at the time, in 1988, and I moved home to Arizona and ran for sheriff in my hometown, where my father had served as an FBI agent for about 25, 30 years. And in 1992, I was reelected, and then in 1994, I became the first sheriff in American history to file a lawsuit against the federal government. And do you remember who was president at that time? Bill Clinton. Thank you very much, historians. And so I filed a lawsuit against the Clinton administration, took it all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and won. And I don't know if you have them yet. Have these been handed out? Okay, just so you know, thank you very much. You have been given a $400,000 document. That's not a punchline. I'll be honest with you. It costs about 50 cents to copy these, okay? But it is a $400,000 document. This is the highlighted version of my Supreme Court case. Now, 6 other sheriffs joined me in that lawsuit, okay? One from Texas. One out of 254. One in the state of independence, in the state sovereignty. And then one from, no, none from Missouri, sorry. one from Mississippi, one from Louisiana, one from Vermont, one from Wyoming, and one from Montana. 7 sheriffs out of 3,080 fought this all the way to the Supreme Court. The 2 of us that ended up at the Supreme Court was Prince from Montana and myself from Arizona. Okay? Thank you very much. And we actually won. But you'll notice, if you'll open your little booklets to page, let me make sure that page 11. There's a page-and-a-half entry about the EPA, because Justice Scalia, who wrote this decision, God rest his soul and God bless him, he gave us a history lesson. He didn't try to create law. He did what the U.S. Supreme Court is supposed to do. And do you know that the word interpret or interpreting is not in the Constitution? They're not assigned to interpret the Constitution. What are they assigned to do? Enforce it. Live it. Just like the rest of us who swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, they took the same oath. And so if they're trying to interpret, what does that mean? Change. Alter. Okay? And so now, what do we get from the Supreme Court? Political agendas and political hacks. They're political hitmen for the president. And that's all the Supreme Court has been reduced to. Is there anywhere that you can find this, that the Founding Fathers' intent in creating a Supreme Court was to be the ultimate arbitrators and the only arbitrators as to what liberty really was intended to be in America? That wasn't their intent either. Because that would be simply creating a 5-member monarchy, controlling everything in America, which is exactly the opposite of what the founders intended. And we're going to go through this, and what I'm going to show you today, besides, you can see this for yourself, the EPA ruled to be unconstitutional in the early 1970s. But those decisions have been rendered out of existence by our wonderful United States Congress and President, just as my decision has been through osmosis or through ignorance or intentional ignorance, have made it to where it doesn't apply. But I'm going to show you the case and I'm going to show you the evidence. This decision is the most powerful 10th Amendment state sovereignty decision in American history. And I will show you the evidence of that. This is also the first time in American history where sheriffs all across this country were commandeered by the federal government to enforce their gun control law known as the Brady Bill. And there were actually 5 Brady Bills scheduled to be passed one year after another until your entire Second Amendment was gone. That was their intent, and that's what they were going to do. Have you heard about the discussion recently in recent years about serializing and regulating ammunition out of existence? That was actually Brady Bill 2. And it got defeated because when it was introduced by Howard Metzenbaum in March of 1994, just 2 months after I filed the lawsuit, it was never made it out of committee because they wanted to see how Brady Bill 1 was going to fare in the courts from these renegade rogue sheriffs who decided to file suit against it. And so it was also the only time in American history where an unfunded, unconstitutional mandate to state officials threatened to arrest us if we failed to comply. I'm not kidding. People think I make this stuff up. So I'll show you the evidence. And as we go through this, I'm sure you're going to have questions, but I'm really intending to answer all of those in the bulk of this. And I will be out at the table afterwards. Now, we have at the table tools for liberty, not just a pocket constitution for you, but the best book in America that I have authored myself that describes a little bit about what Mindy was saying. In the Bunkerville, Nevada Stand for Liberty by the Bundys, did you know that they were the last rancher standing in Clark County? There were 53 ranchers in Clark County. Cliven Bundy and his family were the last ones standing, and now they're pretty much gone. Do you understand that? Who put those other 52 out of business? The federal government. And now this last guy is standing, and they're saying he's a crook. instead of why is he the last standing rancher in the entire county of Clark County, Nevada? What has happened to all those ranchers? And what has happened to our food supply? Astonishing. But I do a review of that situation in here, and I talk about one deputy sheriff who prevented the violence. One, not the sheriff, a deputy sheriff who put himself in the way, who had the courage to tell the BLM snipers and their hired hitmen and mercenaries to stand down and not kill those people. One deputy did it. And that's all in here, and that's for you to see and read on your own, of course. And then the theory and philosophy of our entire CSPOA, this organization that I started, is to erect the barriers. And we have a 5 DVD set, Beth being part of this, Beth Ann being a part of this, erecting the barriers. And that's a quote from James Madison. We can safely rely on the disposition of state legislatures to erect the barriers against the encroachments of the national authority or the federal government. And then a book that started this whole movement of the constitutional sheriff. And we have in our audience tonight, or this afternoon, a candidate for sheriff who's running on that same platform. The county sheriff, America's last hope. And Craig Davis is running for sheriff in, what county is it? Newton County. Yeah, you guys have, he lives in Neosho, or what else. Missouri has weird names. That's what, California, Missouri. You don't get any weirder than that. Mexico, Missouri, and, yeah, Louisiana, Missouri. You guys got to be a little bit more, creative on your names, I guess, But you plagiarize all your names, But anyway, we're gonna get into this, and what I want to make sure that each and every one of you do is that before you leave here, make sure that you become a member of the CSPOA, and I'm absolutely dead serious about that. Do you want to protect your business? Do you want to protect your land? Do you want to protect your ranch? What have we been talking about all day? Imagine now, of all the problems that you've seen and heard today and that you've personally experienced, and that your sheriff was there with his deputies to defend your God-given rights. Can you imagine how well that would go for you? That's what we do. That's what we spend full time on. We create constitutional sheriffs and we train sheriffs how to do that. It's legal. It's lawful, it's constitutional, it's historic, and it's the right thing to do. Want me to add one thing? It's peaceful. It guarantees a peaceful process. It's effective and peaceful, and it's what we're supposed to do as Americans. Now, this first clip, I hope the sound is working right. It seemed to be for the last speaker, so we'll see if I got that same luck. I'll tell you right up front, this is all we're after. This is a deputy sheriff in New York, in Albany, New York, the capital of New York, and he does some amazing things.
The YouTube video going viral, posted on the internet by 2 activists who brought a camera into the Albany International Airport while they passed out flyers. Now, it led to a heated dispute over First Amendment rights. Beth Wertman has our top story. Beth?
Hi, Benita. Well, as you'll see in the video clip, an airport spokesman tries to stop these activists from their mission, but a sheriff's deputy steps in to settle the confrontation and the right to free speech.
So, hey everyone, this is Ashley Jessica. I am here at Albany International Airport.
The young woman is standing outside the security checkpoint at the airport, telling the camera that she's there to hand out flyers to travelers, reminding them of their right to opt out of getting the body scan, which she claims carries health risks.
Okay, on your website.
Hold on. First of all, turn this off right away.
Airport spokesman Doug Myers tells the crew to stop videotaping and to go downstairs, which they agree to do, and they are confronted again.
Do you have $1 million insurance policy here? You're violating the airport authority guidelines. You haven't paid. That doesn't matter to us at all.
They're violating airport guidelines.
At all. Okay,
so
you can check that out.
Doesn't matter?
No, you're in our airport.
But as the tension builds, Sheriff's Deputy Stan Lennox steps in, separating the two parties, then lays down the law.
Obviously, this is your constitutional right, okay? As far as we're concerned.
A deputy sheriff making that determination that this is your constitutional right? How dare he? What does he think he is, the Supreme Court?
You're not breaking any laws, okay? That's what we want to get across to you.
Shouldn't he just arrest them like all cops and let the judge and the courts figure out if they're breaking any laws?
What we want to get across to you guys.
Myers objects, ordering airport employees to allow only ticketed passengers upstairs, accusing the activists of blocking the escalator. But once again, Deputy Lennox defends their First Amendment right.
Okay, so that
We don't
means
know
we're
who
doing
you
it for,
are.
I told you who I am.
Okay.
I am Jason
No.
Burmis.
Let me see
You
your
can clearly-
identification.
I don't need to show you my
He
identification.
doesn't have to show you his identification.
The activists continue their mission. The video later posted to YouTube and goes viral. Not the kind of attention Deputy Lennox is used to.
That's a little overwhelming. I mean, I was doing my job. I did the right thing. I felt I did the right thing, protecting people's First Amendment rights.
Can you imagine? A deputy sheriff, he's not even a sergeant, and he thinks he can protect people's rights. I felt I did the right thing. My dear friends, this is what we're after. A deputy who knows the Constitution, who knows the First Amendment, who doesn't take orders to arrest people, instead defends their rights. Now, I showed you this little DVD set. Well, guess who's on it? Deputy Lennox is in here, getting the award in 2013 for Deputy Sheriff of the Year, Constitutional Deputy Sheriff of the Year. And guess who else is in here? Our Sheriff of the Year that year, David A. Clark Jr. from Milwaukee. Yeah. That should dispel one of the rumors about us or me being racists or bigots. Because if you don't know, he's my brother from another mother who was very dark complected. Okay? And Sheriff Clark and I are very good friends, and he supports what we're doing. And you know why? Because as he said when he accepted our award, is that the CSPOA has always had his back. And we have. And many other sheriffs across this country. We sure hope to have the new sheriff back here and have him working with us. We plan on that happening. Okay? Now, we love this Martin Luther King quote. It's exactly correct. We do not believe that people anywhere should be compelled in any manner to obey unjust laws. And he says, there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. My dear friends, that is absolutely true. And the other side, if you don't show them what we're trying to do with this, they agree. They think this is true. And it is. Just don't tell them that we like it, that we're using this. Because this is a principle that applies here. But it presupposes one thing, the Deputy Lennox principle. You have to know and understand the Constitution and what rights are when you're going to do this. And who's in charge of doing it? Well, in this particular case, it was Deputy Lennox. It was not the U.S. Supreme Court. It was not any other court. It was a deputy sheriff doing his job. What this presupposes is those who swear an oath in God's name to uphold and defend and protect and preserve the U.S. Constitution is that they will know and understand what it meant and what the intent was of those who framed the Constitution. Now, this is the oath of office, and as you'll notice in the Constitution that we swear an oath to the Constitution itself. It's not to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's not to the President or Commander-in-Chief. It's not to the Governor, and it's not to my sergeant. It's to the Constitution. And the Founding Fathers required this in Article 6 of the Constitution, that all members of the legislative, executive, and judicial branches will do one thing. So our goal, even though we're three separate branches and we do separate things, did you know that the other two branches are not allowed to control the executive branch, for which police work? How many times do you hear police even say, I have to do whatever the legislatures and the judges tell me? Well, then we only have 2 branches if you work for them. Is it okay for police to tell legislatures, I'm not going to do that? Is it okay for cops to tell judges, I'm not going to do that? Of course. That's why we're 3 separate branches. And they cannot and do not control us. Do we work together? Yes. And for what? This. To uphold and defend the Constitution. That is our oath. That is our duty. We are the guardians of the constitutional republic. We are the last line of defense. We are the first line of defense. We are here to defend your rights. Now, state nullification. Look at those first 2 words there. Did I create state nullification? No, I did not. And who did? Well, that would be Madison and Jefferson, wouldn't it? Do you know why they wrote the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions regarding state nullification? Why did they write those? Because of the Alien and Sedition Act that President John Adams was supporting. One of the very issues that we fought the Revolutionary War to stop. And did we tell you, the founders weren't always perfect, were they? Well, Adams made a huge mistake on this. And Madison and Jefferson came forward and say, we don't have to go to court over this. We don't have to make new legislation over this. All we need is for the governors and the state legislatures to do their job and nullify this ridiculous law called the Alien and Sedition Act. Doesn't that sound like a good idea? We don't sue, which costs $400,000 in my particular case. Do we really have the time and money to take all these abuses to the U.S. Supreme Court? And do you know how many cases the Supreme Court hears? 1% that cross their desk. Do you think your case is going to make it? After maybe 5 or 6 years, you might get lucky. Ours was pushed ahead quickly because of the issue, and it took 3.5 years. So, we all know that there's not time and enough money to do that. Now, look at the bottom there in gold. States have the authority to judge the constitutionality of the federal government's laws and decrees. Why do we have that authority? Again, this was already said once today. Let's reiterate. Who formed the federal government? The 13 original states. The founding fathers, or we the people. Those 3 are the only answers you can get from that. He also argued, Madison, states should refuse to enforce laws which they deemed unconstitutional. There you go back to those just and unjust laws. Who makes that determination? Deputy Sheriff Lennox, Sheriff Clark, and many other sheriffs across this country. James Madison wrote in his, and he used a very powerful word. Who can tell me what that word in gold means? It is a golden word. It is a doctrine. The doctrine of interposition. What does interpose mean, or interposition mean? Somebody just whispered it. Stand between, put yourself in the way. Just like Deputy Lennox, he stood in the way. He told the airport manager to back off. They don't have to give you their identification. They haven't done anything wrong. Okay? This is a deputy doing his job, keeping his oath, keeping the peace, a true peace officer. And so interpose is a basketball term. Didn't know that, did you? You're too short. But if in basketball, and I don't want to get too involved here because I didn't wear my tennis shoes. I didn't wear my basketball shoes. But plain and simply, it's defense, okay? And I used to play a lot of basketball. And the basketball in defense is how you win games. And so the person from the EPA or the evil person from the IRS or USDA or whatever is here. The sheriff is here defending the law-abiding citizen. How about the couple right over here with their cattle problems? And you put yourself in the way as sheriff, as the guard of the Constitution. And if they move, you move. Just like in basketball. Because their goal is over here to victimize a law-abiding citizen. and you put yourself in the way, and that's why this is peaceful. I didn't say shoot, I didn't say arrest, I said interpose. And you put yourself in the way. And it's powerful, and it's strong, and it's constitutional, and it's the right thing to do. Interpose. You must have sheriffs with the courage and the knowledge of the Constitution to interpose. Now, these are the two sheriffs that went to the Supreme Court on this case. I know a lot of you haven't heard of it, but you have this $400,000 document now in your hand. You really need to read it and study it. Look at this, what they said, and they're just quoting the New York case here. Scalia is taking us through a history lesson. He says, we have held, however, that state legislatures are not subject to federal direction. Why are we not subject to federal direction? Because they're not our boss. They've never been our boss. Why do we acquiesce and go along? Because they have a thing called federal funding or federal grants, which are better known as legalized bribery. And is there such thing as legalized bribery? No. It's bribery. And not only that, they steal the money from us throughout the states, and then they take it to Washington and set up all these bureaucracies, and then they set up these funds to give it back to us. Might want to consider not sending that to them in the first place. Yeah. Okay, and this is Judge John Roll, who first heard my case in Tucson, Arizona, and he says that, look at this, Mack is thus forced to choose between keeping his oath or obeying the law or act, subjecting himself to possible sanctions. He was incensed about their threat of arrest towards us. In fact, this man interposed for me numerous times. Do you realize that we won every pretrial motion? Every single pretrial. The Janet Reno Justice Department was trying to remove me for standing and all sorts of other reasons. They were trying to get rid of the lawsuit before it even got to court. And Judge Roll sided with us every single time. Almost unheard of. Okay? And look at the word up there, Cleo. Justice Scalia calls the two sheriffs on this lawsuit the Cleos. The Brady Bill itself addresses us as the Cleos. The BATF, when they brought us the rules and our marching orders to comply with the Brady Bill, called us the Cleo. Do you want to see one time in documented American jurisprudence history where the sheriff is declared the Cleo, the chief law enforcement officer of the county and in this country? Look no further than this decision and the Brady Bill itself. Now, this is the threat of arrest under a separate provision of the Gun Control Act. That's the Federal Gun Control Act of 1968. Any person who knowingly violates the section of the GCA amended by the Brady Bill shall be fined under this title, imprisoned no more than 1 year, or both. So my attorney came to me and he said, hey, Sheriff, do you want to have some fun on this? And I said, yeah, as if we're not already. And he goes, I think we could get an order of protection, an injunction against the Justice Department and the White House from coming after you as long as we're in court. And I said, really, you're serious? I said, we could get an order of protection against the president? I told him, that means I would be the first person in history to sue the president, Bill Clinton, on a non-sexual matter. You know? Yeah. So, believe it or not, it's part of the record. We got the injunction. Amazing. That's what I would have liked, yes. Now, Ronald Reagan said that our federal tax system was un-American, it reeked with injustice, and was deserved rebellion. I think it's time. And if we have sheriffs standing by us, do you want to stop the abuse of the IRS? Do you want to stop the abuse of the EPA? Do you want to defend the right to keep and bear arms? Do you want to defend food freedom in this country? Do you know that we actually have Sheriff Brad Rogers from Elkhart County, Indiana, who protected an Amish farmer in his county because the FDA kept going after him and after him and after him. And finally, because the Amish are so passive, they just, like, okay, come in again. And he passed every one of their unconstitutional inspections. Finally, they said they were upset with wasting all that time, so they took him before a grand jury, and they gave him notice that he was going to be called to a grand jury situation in Detroit. And now he contacts the sheriff and tells the sheriff he wants help. Sheriff Rogers told the FDA, if you come back in my county without due process, without duly signed warrants and probable cause, I will arrest you for trespassing. It just so happens that Sheriff Rogers had our constitutional training about 3 years before that. And now the FDA turned around and threatened Rogers with felony obstruction of justice charges. Brad calls me and he says, hey Mack, let me tell you, I'm not intimidated, but the FDA has threatened to arrest me. He says, two things. First, I told my wife if I do get arrested to call you first and make sure you get me out. I said, we'll do it. Second, he says, I want you to help me write a letter to the FDA telling them how they can't do any of this. I said, I got you on that, Brad. We'll do it. So we did that letter. He signed it, sent it to them, and 3 days later, Mr. Hostetler, the Amish farmer in question, received a notice from the FDA that everything against him had been dropped. The FDA left town, and they haven't been back in over 3.5 years. Yeah. Now, every time that we have sheriffs standing against the federal government, guess what happens? It ends peacefully, and they back off. The problem is, in Bunkerville, Nevada, 2.5 years ago, the sheriff wouldn't do anything and said the BLM could do whatever they wanted. Then at the end, at the showdown, there were a few deputy sheriffs hanging around watching, and one refused to watch and stood in the way. Again, make sure you get that book. Are you a David? That's a question for every public official and every citizen. Are you a David? Now, let me make sure. Okay. Now, Thomas Paine, I love Thomas Paine. Britain, with an army to enforce her tyranny, has declared that she has not only a right to tax, but to bind us in all cases whatsoever. And if being bound in that manner is not slavery, then is there not such a thing as slavery upon earth? What does that compare to? What would you compare the Declaratory Act to? If they can legislate in all matters concerning our lives, would that not be Obamacare? It absolutely is. I said that before it passed. I said if they can do Obamacare to us, they can do anything. And it is. And this is how we've come full circle. And we have the redcoats coming to our homes. And now it's even more comparable to the Gestapo and not just redcoats. And Jennifer Long was an IRS agent who testified before Congress in 1998 that the IRS used egregious and unlawful tactics to go after citizens who they knew could not defend themselves financially. These were things that went on, and what happened? Trey Gowdy and others pointed their fingers at the IRS director, and they got real mad and said, boy, we're upset with you guys. Did they do anything about it? Not one thing. They didn't do anything about it. The IRS is still doing the same abuses today, and it gets worse all the time. Now, also, they had another bunch of Republicans up in Washington, D.C. pointing their finger at the DEA. Can you imagine? This is just reported a year ago, a little over a year ago, my friends. U.S. drug agents engaged in sex parties. Subtitle, Cartels Supplied the Prostitutes, Justice Report Review. Can you believe that we allow this to occur in this country? Do you know how many of those DEA agents, they were doing it for years, the report said. How many of those DEA agents that are supposed to be fighting the cartels and are paid by us to fight the cartels, they're taking bribes sexually from them, and how many of them were prosecuted? Not one. How many of them were fired or disciplined in any way? None. Because the federal government can do these things to us over and over. And what did Thomas Paine say about that? What signifies it to me? What difference does it make to me, he means? Whether he who destroys my property and kills or threatens to kill me is a king or a common man, my countryman or not my countryman. Whether it be done by an individual villain or an army of them. If we reason to the root of things, we shall find no difference. Neither can any just cause be assigned why we should punish in the one case and pardon in the other. Exactly what happens in Washington, D.C., and Paine wrote about it back in 1772. Astonishing how we've come full circle. And we have local officials and governors who say they can't do anything about it. What are they waiting for? Erect the barriers. Stand in the way. Interpose. Enforce. Obey. And defend the United States Constitution as what? You already promised you would do when you took your job. Amazing process, isn't it? Are you seeing the equation here? It's up to us to do this. Do you know that there's real hope? I have hope in people like Craig Davis. I have hope. We're working with sheriffs all across this country. Tomorrow I'm going to see it and work with another one. We've been driving all over the Midwest and South recently, putting miles on like these vehicles that we've been using like crazy, thousands and thousands of miles. Working with candidates. We've already had huge victories where constitutional sheriffs are winning all across this country. We're proud of them for taking the courageous stands that they are for American ideals. We're going to keep doing this, and we need you to be a part of it. It is incontestable, this is back to my Supreme Court decision, it is incontestable that the Constitution established a system of dual sovereignty. Although the state surrendered, and that's wrong, but Scalia corrects it here in just a minute. We didn't surrender any of our powers, did we? We delegated. The 10th Amendment says we delegated. However, he says, the states retained a residuary and inviolable sovereignty. Do you think that if Missouri or Arizona or Texas were inviolably sovereign that they'd be able to run their own land, their own air, their own education, their own health care, their own bathrooms? Now, wait a minute. I'll be the first one to admit, if you want an expert on sewage and toilets, call on Barack Obama and others in Washington, D.C. However, I would still say, regardless of the kind of consulting he would give you on how to run your toilets, I think we can run them without the federal government's intervention. And now here goes Scalia again, and this equation for liberty and the equation for the solution that we at CSPOA push every day, do training every day about this nationwide to our sheriffs, police, and all elected local officials. And boy, we want to get before your Missouri legislature and your governor with this mission that we're about and their duty to do the same thing. Erect the barriers and interpose. Residual state sovereignty was also implicit, of course, in the Constitution's conferral upon Congress of what? Not all government powers. But what kind do they have then? He tells you, but only discrete enumerated ones. How do we keep it that way? Which implication was rendered absolute or express by the assertion of the 10th Amendment. Now, all you legal scholars, I have a question for you. Who has the constitutional, moral, and integrity obligation to enforce the 10th Amendment? Who else? State legislature? How about your city legislature? How about your county commissioners? How about your dog catcher? How about your governors, state reps, state senators, and we the people? All of us working together for what? God-given liberty. That's what it's for. And what is all government for? This was alluded to just a little while ago. I can't remember who it was. But I'm really glad I got to hear some of your other speeches. They were excellent. You just alluded to it. What's the purpose of all government? The Constitution doesn't even tell you that. Did you know that? It's the Declaration of Independence that does. And it absolutely is vital to how our government is run. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. What rights? Life, liberty, and property. And that your sheriff has some sort of obligation to go along either with the state or the federal government when they're outside the law? When they're outside that purpose? Do you really think there is a way on God's green earth that your sheriff has an obligation to go along with abusive government or those who violate the Bill of Rights and those who violate that principle as described in the Declaration of Independence? It's just the opposite. We have an obligation and a duty and responsibility to our citizens and constituents that we will oppose such tyrannical behavior in our counties. We can't sit by and watch this happen anymore. You have a right to your farm. You have a right to your ranch. You have a right to your family. And those rights came from God. And no man can take those away. But there are men and women who have a duty to protect those. The Constitution didn't give you any rights. That was a mistake I heard today. It guarantees that which God gave you. Unless we enforce them, we lose them. Unless we interpose, we lose them. And we're not winning right now, but I'm telling you, we can and we have. And I am so encouraged by it. I love these sheriffs we work for. I love them when they stand up for freedom. Absolutely astonishing, and they win, and it's an amazing miracle. And there are so many miracles going on. Wow, it's great. There is no hope in Washington, D.C., my friends. I hate to be pessimistic about that. But read Patrick Henry, what he said about that in his famous Give Me Liberty speech. There is no hope there. But there is hope in your county. There is hope in his county. There is hope with what we're doing, and we're spending full time spreading this mission of hope. Because what? 4 words. Uphold, defend, protect, and serve. All of that together creates a peaceful and constitutional country. The great innovation of this design, again with the Mack Prince ruling, our citizens would have 2 political capacities, one state and one federal, each protected from incursion by the other. It's our job as state officials to protect you from the incursions of other governments. As Madison expressed it, the local or municipal authorities form distinct and independent portions of the supremacy. No, my friends, the supremacy clause does not grant carte blanche to the federal government, and it does not grant them power over the states. Quite the contrary. This separation of the 2 spheres is one of the Constitution's structural protections of liberty. Did you hear what they're comparing state sovereignty to there? A structural protection of liberty. Wow, Mindy, we're really talking about nothing important here, are we? Just those structural protections of liberty things, huh? My goodness, how powerful can you get? Did I tell you this decision was the most powerful 10th Amendment decision? Let's read on. Just as the separation and independence of the coordinate branches of the federal government serve to prevent the accumulation of excessive power in any one branch, a healthy balance of power between the states and the federal government will reduce the risk of tyranny and abuse from either front. When you came to this meeting today, did you want to know how to prevent tyranny and abuse? Here it is. Who must do that? Who must maintain that healthy balance of power between the states and the federal government? Is there any way that's up to the federal government? No. It's up to your governor. It's up to your sheriff. It's up to your school boards. It's up to your city council and county commissioners. And the last line of defense, the sheriff. He can do it. He cannot do it alone. If you're not backing your sheriff and working with your sheriff and being a part of the CSPOA, we can help you do that. And we can't do it without you either. We can't. Hence, again quoting James Madison, can you believe it? The United States Supreme Court quoting the Federalist Papers and the Founders. Wow. A double security arises to the rights of the people. The different governments will control each other at the same time that each will be controlled by itself. Any question as to whether or not the federal government will control itself? Okay, didn't think so. The power of the federal government would be augmented immeasurably if it were able to impress into its service, and at no cost to itself, the police officers of the 50 states. They cannot do that unless we take the money and we let them, because we want that money. It's free money, you know. So what do we do at the CSPOA? We train our sheriffs not to take the money. First, it's not Congress's money to give, and it's not ours to take. And we can't do that anymore. And so many sheriffs run bragging how many grants they're going to get and put in for. Taking the taxpayers' money in that way, in that manner, no, that's not right. Don't do it. Now, the federal government, we held, may not compel the states to enact or administer a federal regulatory program. That saves your bathrooms right there, doesn't it? It also prevents your state from having to do Obamacare. I'm sorry. And do you know that Obama saw that coming? And so he bribed the states to go along. In Arizona, then Governor Jan Brewer took $2 billion, supposedly to help the state with its Medicare problems. It was to take Obamacare. $2 billion. Not bad, huh? This is my favorite quote from the entire Supreme Court decision, the Mack Prince case. But the Constitution protects us from our own best intentions. How would you like that? How about that being enforced? That has never been undone, my friends. But it's up to us to enforce that. It divides power among sovereigns and among branches of government precisely so that we may resist the temptation to concentrate power in one location as an expedient solution to the crisis of the day. Have you heard that one before? It's in the U.S. Supreme Court decision. Crisis of the day. Barack Obama's motto, Rahm Emanuel, Barack Obama, never let a good crisis go to waste. Why? Even if you have to create one. Because that's when you really get people scared and they'll do anything you say. Get behind your local officials to erect the barriers against the crisis of the day stuff. Now, we're going to get right into this. Badge versus the badge. Now, this is the end segment of the presentation. Badge versus the badge. Any of you familiar with Range magazine? In 2003, I knew you were. In 2003, they do an article about 3 sheriffs standing against the BLM. Never heard about that, did you? Unless you read Range magazine. Sheriff Gary Amon from Owee County, Idaho, made it clear that he didn't want BLM help in local law enforcement and warned that he expected to be notified of any federal investigation or enforcement action, including impoundment of cattle the feds considered to be trespassing on U.S. property. Amazing, isn't it? Trespassing cattle, they'll come get them. Yeah. And Sheriff Amon said no. San Bernardino, if San Bernardino sheriff can do this, come on, friends. Don't you think you ought to have a few in Missouri? We're going to, right, Sheriff Davis? Okay. He simply revoked the local law enforcement authority from federal government across all 20,000 square miles of his county and advised them to consult him first before taking action on private property. Again, that's part of our CSPOA resolution, friends. We do this full time to make sure sheriffs know that this is their duty, to make sure that feds check with him first before they do anything to you. Before what? They victimize their people, just as Madison said in his resolution, in the Virginia resolution. And then, of course, Sheriff Ken Jones from Eureka County. What they really want is to extend federal authority over all law enforcement in the United States, whether local people agree with that or not, says Jones. Well, it's not in this county. That's what we want every sheriff to tell them. There's a few things you're not going to do in my county anymore. And the first you better do is check with me before you do anything enforcement-wise in my county. And we're going to get along great as long as you follow a few rules. And is there any way that there could be a Washington, D.C. bureaucrat that would supersede the authority of your constitutionally elected sheriff who represents we the people, is elected by, for, and of the people, or some bureaucrat from Washington, D.C., who most of the time doesn't even live there? There's no way that he could supersede the sheriff's authority. And there's no way that any sheriff should acquiesce and say, oh, it's the federal government. They can do whatever they want. How could we be doing our job and allow the feds to come in with unfettered access to the people in his county? There's no way. Badge versus the badge. I guarantee you which badge works and which one is the bigger badge. We must have the courage to do this. We must stand. And when we have lived under a pernicious power long enough, no matter how oppressive, we grow so accustomed to the yoke that its removal seems frightening, even wrong. We have the people to remove that yoke, my dear friends. It's called the sheriff. It's called his posse, you, being involved with this. And I will tell you, come out to the table. We have a terrific deal for you. It's $50 to become a member. We need you. We need you part of this holy cause of liberty. Do you want us to keep going in what we're doing? I'm asking you to join us in that holy cause of liberty. It's $50 to become a member. Every one of the tools, the freedom tools that I just showed you up here, they cost like $85. And then you'll get those for another $50, all of them. And by the way, I need to give one to Beth Ann right now. Thought I forgot about you, didn't you? Okay. And there's a way for us to work together on this. And we need you a part of the team. And we need you a part. We don't have eyes all across the country. And that's where you come in. We need to hear from you. You call our office and you'll get Skylar or one of our other assistants and you say, hey, they're taking away this guy's farm. They're taking away this guy's property. The IRS is seizing everything. There's a way for sheriffs to stop that too. Even bank garnishments. Do you understand what I'm saying? Even bank seizures. And we're training cops. You don't take money from people and then have them prove how they got it, which we know is already happening. We're having to retrain some of our cops. Most of them are good people, I admit that. Some of them have not been trained right. And this is nothing new. This is actually Dick Carver. Do you remember Dick Carver? He was the county commissioner from Nye County, Nevada, who got up on his bulldozer and reopened a road that had been washed out during a flood. Of course, the Forest Service said, you can't touch that road until we do all our inspections and our environmental impact studies. And the county commissioners there voted 3-0 unanimously to fix the road. But they said the county commissioner, known as Dick Carver, had to be the one to do it. Well, he had a big machinery company and he got up on his bulldozer and he fixed that road. In my county, they wouldn't let us fix a bridge. And they threatened to arrest the county commissioners if they tried to fix it. And of course, we already talked about this a bunch of times. What did they want to charge the county for every day that we were trying to fix the bridge? $35,000 a day. They might as well said $3.5 million, you know. And so they said they were going to arrest the county commissioners and the maintenance workers. So I called the Army Corps of Engineers into my office. And I said, you're not arresting anybody in my county, especially while we're serving, protecting, and upholding. And I said, if you try, I'm going to arrest you. And guess what happened? They left town. The bad guys left town. The good guys fixed the bridge and went home, and we didn't pay one dime in fines, and we didn't have anybody go to jail. Isn't that how it's supposed to be? That's what I'm talking about in erecting the barriers. The Sheriff Rogers, the Sheriff Clarks, the Deputy Lennox, the Sheriff Palmers, the Sheriff Finches. All across America, we have sheriffs doing this. Now, we need to make it a household name. Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. My friends, if I could, I want to leave you with a dedication that when I was converted to the Constitution, this wonderful man, Dr. Cleon Skousen, had 240 cops get up and he taught us a little kindergarten exercise. I want to share that exercise with you now as my closing. And I dedicate it to each of you. One of the greatest honors I have is to do this all across the country and look in your eyes. And I get such strength from it when I see people like you. And I know that there's hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands of people all across this country that want the same as you do. Leave me alone. And we have somebody, and we actually have somebody that works for us that will guarantee that. And you vote for him every 4 years. And this dedication I also want to make to Justice Scalia, who changed my life and changed America with this, and Judge John Roll, who changed my life and dedicated himself to this, who was later, in 2011, killed at the assassination attempt in the Safeway parking lot on Congresswoman Giffords. January 8, 2011. He was actually killed at that incident, Judge John M. Roll. And I dedicate it to my good friend, Dick Carver, who dedicated his life to the holy cause of liberty. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Is there any of us in here who cannot do likewise? We must. We must emulate the founders. We must follow their path. And they're the ones that left us this. And to the founders, I dedicate this also. And I want you to remember, while I do this, remember, I learned this at police training. And it goes like this. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And that's the eagle. Long may she be free. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was.
Am I out of time?
You sure do. We are going to take some questions. Before we do, I would like Craig Davis to stand up. Is Craig Davis here? Running for sheriff in Newton County?
Craig.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you so much. Okay, Curtis Reig, you have a question? I'm on my way.
Go ahead.
So, Sheriff, I'd like you to give me your perspective on citizen arrests.
Okay.
And citizens acting as posses, if you will, with the local sheriff.
Well, first of all, we train our sheriffs to have posses, okay, and they're vital. However, make sure that as a member of his posse, you are not violating what he wants you to do. The posse serves however he says, okay? If he says you're assistants on patrol or you're backup patrol officers, then that's what you are. But I don't think he wants you chasing down shoplifters from Safeway. However, if you see something and he wants you to, and he says follow them, even a lot of security guards now at malls are told, you don't arrest anybody, you don't hold them, you follow them, you get their license, and you tell the police. When I used to work in a grocery store, we tackled them, we held them, we arrested them. That was the funnest time to work in a grocery store, you know? So do you have the authority to do that as a citizen? Yes, you do, okay? Where did the police get all authority? We the people. We the people, and we forget this so often in our country. We forget who bestows all power in this country. It's us. Yeah, it's from us. We are the top of the pyramid, and it's an upside down pyramid, okay? The people are at the top. You know what's at the bottom? The smallest part and the least important part is the federal government. And they keep trying to make themselves the most important part, and they're not. And they're not allowed to run our land and our farms and our ranches and our homes and our health care and our education and every facet of our lives. That is not their job, and we have allowed that to happen. And I'm sorry, but it's your counties and your cities and your states' fault because they have not interposed and they have not erected the barriers as they're supposed to. And that's where our wake-up call comes in. Posses are vital in this process, but make sure you're just following what the sheriff wants you to do. It's up to him. It's totally up to him. And we want you all to have a relationship with him. Who's next?
Next question, Doug. Here I come. I'm getting my
I
steps
saw the lady in the
today.
back first, Mindy. Yeah.
Who?
The
Where?
lady in the back, right there.
Oh, there. Yes, of course. Thank you.
With the Humane Society being, what did you say, Mindy, in partnering with the sheriff's, National Sheriff's Association,
Yeah.
and they show up on our property, the sheriff with a warrant for an illegal seizure.
You got to make sure that your sheriff's a part of us. Now, let's also be certain here. We don't believe for 1 minute that we're going to get every sheriff on board, okay? We believe that we can get a fourth with no problem. That's 700 sheriffs. And we are going to do that, okay? Maybe your sheriff will be a complete sellout. One, get rid of him as soon as you can, or get him educated. There might be even some of those guys that are reachable and teachable because they don't know what we're talking about. By now, I would venture to say that 90% of the sheriffs know what we're about. We do not have a good relationship with the National Sheriff's Association for that very reason. The NSA is a big sellout. They go along with anything the federal government does, and they get a lot of money from the federal government. I won't go into how or what. The federal government buys a lot of booth space at their national conventions. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth every year. Even close to $1 million a year that the NSA gets from the federal government. So they're part of the DC corruption politics. So what we suggest is that we deal with each sheriff at the local level, and you work with your sheriff and you get him to erect the barriers before these problems arise. Okay? So this is why we need to get going. And what do we need to do? We need to make this constitutional sheriff thing bigger, better, and faster right now. We don't have a lot of time. Okay? And then, yeah.
Very similar question, and you kind of answered part of it already because you said that you guys don't get along with the NSA, but they've partnered with the Humane Society, and that's where I thought she was going with this.
Yeah.
So how do we stop that partnership, or is there any way that we can put pressure on that? The Humane Society is being sued by the state of Oklahoma, yet they're training the state of Oklahoma's sheriffs in how to come and take animals.
Yeah.
Any suggestions?
There's a lot of incongruous and conflicts of interest like that. That happens all the time. Make sure you reach your sheriff. A lot of sheriffs don't even know this association has happened with the Humane Society. They don't. That's where you come in. You know, if your sheriff gets 10 calls or 10 visits, he's going to go home and tell his wife, hundreds of people are contacting me about this. Okay? He will. It's just human nature. So make sure he hears from you. That's why it is so important that you become a part of what we're doing. Okay? We have the surveys for your sheriffs. We have the resolutions for you and your sheriffs. We've already done the groundwork. And my goodness, if everybody read this 50-page booklet, The County Sheriff, America's Last Hope, then you're going to know what your sheriff is supposed to know. And then you follow up with that, with the book I just gave Beth Ann, Are You a David? Oh, man. You're going to have like a college degree in the duties and responsibilities of the county sheriff. So, anybody else?
Sheriff Mack, thank you very much. I'm over here.
And I'll be back at the table and come back there and whatever oh, wait, sorry.
How much does your training cost if we want to get our local sheriff into your training?
Okay.
And I don't know if we have time,
Really-
but I'm curious on your opinion on was Scalia assassinated?
No, oh, yeah. All I know is when the government acts like they have something to hide, they usually do. I don't know why they just didn't do an autopsy, and a public official like that in that stature, they should have just said, you know, he was old, he died of a heart attack, blah, blah, blah. Judge Roll being killed was also something very suspicious. And what was the other part? Oh, the training, yes. In fact, we're now doing a national training to train you to do what I do. We want you to come to that. That costs a little bit. You need to be a life member for that. And any of you who become life members today, you'll already be eligible for that training. And then to come out to the training costs anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000, depending on how far and how many people we bring. But do not let the cost get in your way. I don't care what it costs, we'll get there, okay? But obviously, if we don't make some money somewhere, we'll be out, we'll be gone. And that's why your membership really is vital, okay? What else?
We have more, just one quick question.
Okay.
Elaine?
I just wondered if you can tell us whether a given sheriff happens to be a member.
Who? Which one?
Rich Stanek, Hennepin County, Minnesota.
Ooh, I don't remember. We do have 3 or 4 in Minnesota, so the likelihood is that he's not. But we do have a training for him, and just like her question was, now you go to that sheriff and say, we want you to, first ask your sheriff if he's a constitutional sheriff. And the easy answer is he would say, well, of course, we're all supposed to be. But that doesn't mean he is. Saying you are, and just because you took the oath, is he an oath keeper? Does he keep his oath? Is he a constitutional sheriff? Will he stand? Will he interpose on your behalf? I want you to go ask that sheriff those 2 questions. Are you a constitutional sheriff? And 2, will you have Sheriff Mack's training here for your entire office? All your department. Okay? Ask those 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.